All right, hi y'all, welcome back. We're going to continue Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We're now in book 4, the final book of the treatise, and we'll start with chapter 1. Excuse me. That the general will is indestructible. Rousseau says a good state is a simple state based on the common will. The more complicated, the more likely it will be taken over by some internal faction. He says, quote, but when the social bond begins to be relaxed and the state to grow weak, when particular interests begin to make themselves felt and the smaller societies to exercise an influence over the larger, the common interest changes and finds opponents. Opinion is no longer unanimous. The general will ceases to be the will of all. Contradictory views and debates arise, and the best advice is not taken without question. Iniquitous decrees directed solely to private interest get passed under the name of laws. So the bigger the bureaucracy gets, the bigger the state gets, the more likely we're going to see particularized interests rather than the good of all. Okay, chapter 2, voting. He talks about sort of the spectrum of electoral outcomes, right? And he says, unanimity can be a signal of the general will. Quote, the more concert reigns in the assemblies, that is, the nearer opinion approaches unanimity, the greater is the dominance of the general will. So he's saying it's a good thing to have some bipartisanship, basically, in passing laws, right? But then he says, but if we get too close to true unanimity, that can be a real problem or a sign of despotism or tyranny. And if you think about, look at Putin's most recent election, or, Idi Amin elections, or Saddam Hussein elections, right, where 96% of people are voting for Saddam or Putin, like, cut me a break. That's a sign of tyranny, right? And he says, this is the case when the citizens, having fallen into servitude, have lost both liberty and will. Fear and flattery then change votes into acclamation. Deliberation ceases, and only worship or malediction is left. So you either have a sort of demigod type figure, right, or you have a tyrant. And he further goes on and says the only unanimous decision that should ever exist in the body politic is the social contract itself. After that, there has to at least be debate. I mean, someone's going to disagree, right? And the majority, he says, is to be followed at all times because of the social contract. And he says, quote, when therefore the opinion that is contrary to my own prevails, this proves neither more nor less than that I was mistaken, and that what I thought to be the general will was not so. But, I would still point back to the problem of tyranny of the majority. We know when there are small minority ethnic or racial groups, they tend to be tyrannized. And we see this in America. We see this across the planet. So, um, and that's one thing that really Hamilton and others really hammered on in Madison was the tyranny of the majority idea and how to put in checks and balances even within a democratic system, right? Okay, so we're going to skip chapter 3 and we're going to skip chapter 4, the Roma Comitia, and we're going to move to chapter 5, the Tribunate. And here he's kind of talking about gerrymandering in voting districts. And he basically says, we cannot allow gerrymandering to occur. That is a clear violation of the social contract. And he suggests that there be some semblance of a professional board, a bipartisan professional board to regulate the relationship between the citizens and the legislature who choose non-partisan electoral districts. He says, quote, when an exact proportion cannot be established between the constituent parts of a state, or when causes that cannot be removed continually alter the relation of one part to another, recourse is had to the institution of a peculiar magistracy that enters into no corporate unity with the rest. And so basically here he's talking about the judiciary, that we need at least three branches, right? The judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, and then maybe this professional board that draws districts should be inside the judiciary. Okay, we'll do one more and then I'll shut it down for the final lecture. Chapter 6, the dictatorship. Rousseau, points out that inability to change a constitution can be ruinous for a state, especially a state in the throes of a disaster. He says inflexibility of law, which prevents them from adapting themselves to circumstances, may, in certain cases, render them disastrous and make them bring about, at a time of crisis, the ruin of the state. It is wrong, therefore, to wish to make political institutions so strong as to render it impossible to suspend their operation. So, he's saying we need some malleability in our laws, and maybe our Constitution should be changed after 250 years. There are some that suggest that we should sort of change the way that elections are run and move more towards a PR system. There are some that say there are problems with the Second Amendment and the unadulterated gun violence that happens in America that doesn't happen in most developed countries. So there are questions to be had about where we are as a nation and how we move forward under the context of the modern society. So he's got some really interesting things to say about this. He also makes the distinction between a monarchy and a dictatorship, which he claims is sometimes necessary when the laws are contrary to the state's preservation. And my question here would be is this true? Is it advantageous sometimes for a dictatorship to be able to step in? Arguably, Abraham Lincoln was a dictator. He turned off habeas corpus, right? The need to produce evidence to arrest someone. You could be arrested and held without trial and without evidence. We were in a civil war, and he disbanded the civil rights of American citizens. And so, while I look up to Abraham Lincoln quite a lot, there are some concerning actions there. And the question is dictatorship sometimes the best option, right? During World War II, when Roosevelt locked up Japanese Americans in concentration camps, was that necessary? Was that just? Was that moral? These are tough questions, And then he says, quote, during the first period of the Republic, he's sort of poking back at Rome again, recourse was very often had to dictatorship because the state had not yet a firm enough basis to be able to maintain itself by the strength of its constitution alone. However, he says there must be limits on the dictatorship. And he basically says there should be 6-week to 6-month limit where you have to step down after you've sort of gotten your state out of an emergency situation. All right, I'm going to cut it off there, and then we'll do the final chapter. Thanks for being here. Have a great day.